security. Hello and welcome back. Now it's time for the SGP podcast powered by Moser Racing. My name is Paul Glover. Joining me is the one and only Jonathan Earle, but our guest this week is a man that I met at the Sim Racing Expo for the first time last year, but he's a man I've been aware of for a little while because I've done a bit of commentating over the years, and he's taken part in a few races, but these days he's running his own business and he can tell us a little bit more about that. Welcome, the one and only Josh Martin. How are you?
I'm doing very well, guys. Thanks for having me. How's it going with you?
Yeah, good, thank you. I don't know if you've seen any of the racing action that we're taking part with today, but for those who are just listening to the podcast, we are broadcasting the Moser Endurance Championship at Spa, and it's a bit of a wet one. But yeah, so Josh, good questions that I like to start off with for anybody who's a guest on a podcast is, how did you get into sim racing?
Yeah, it's a great question to start. So I've been in sim racing for, I keep saying 5 years, but I think it's probably been a little bit longer now. I started off, I sent an email to Thrustmaster saying that I wanted to get some racing hardware, and they sent me some stuff, which was cool. I picked up a Assetto Corsa, absolutely fell in love with the game, the mods, the content, so much that could be going on, and started to compete, somewhat competitively over there. Then obviously ACC launched, so got involved in kind of more organized, more proper sim racing, as the case may be. Spent the past few years competing there. In 2020, raced with Bentley and SRO before all the fast guys turned up. And then also alongside all that was kind of trying to carve out a bit of a career as well. So started off with kind of helping David over at the Sim Grids, and then moved away to launch Simstaff. So I've kind of been involved in every aspect of sim racing just because it's a huge passion of mine.
Yeah, and were you much of a racer kind of before you started getting into sim racing as a job full time, before you started doing the SRO? I mean, we talked about it with Aris last time around, how we kind of got started. So I'm not going to repeat how I got started because everybody heard it last time around. But for you, what was your kind of initial start to the what I call the drug is kind of racing games and things like that? What do you remember about your youth?
Yeah, for sure. I think Aris has probably got a few years on me, so he probably played some of the older games. But
I've got a few years on you too as well, Josh. Don't worry.
So I think my first ever racing game, if you want to call it that, was Lego Racers on the PS1.
Okay.
Can't remember when that came out, but and then obviously Colin McRae Rally and the F1 games as they kind of picked up as well. So probably around 99, 2000 is when I first got into the racing genre. Yeah.
So and as you say, you took part in, I think, the first kind of SRO esports series. You just made a quip there about, until the professionals turned up. Did you notice a change during your time when you were taking part in esports, that there was like a switch, and was that during COVID where people started taking it a bit more seriously?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I'm sure you guys have seen it as well, even in the endurance series that's running with yourselves. But the younger guys are coming into the field, and these are people who have been conditioned on proper sim racing titles. I remember I was watching, I think it was Brendan Lee in F1 Esports just pre-pandemic, and watching how he was driving, it was literally like watching a computer, because there was all these micro changes going on constantly. And I prefer a bit more sort of clunky, older style touring cars in Assetto Corsa. So then to suddenly have all these variables change and watch as the guys get more competitive, it's just a different breed now, right? I'm sure you guys probably see the same thing. It's just the level of competitiveness is through the roof, right?
100%. Yeah. The top, just watching some of the top level esports guys now, they're making tiny adjustments constantly just for each corner, and it's changed so much since the start of, say, esports racing. You wouldn't ever see that, say, sort of 3-4 years ago. It's definitely got more intricate and more technical, I'd say. So
for sure.
Yeah, I guess when you were racing, you didn't have a team of engineers with you, as where I think when you see some events now, they have a team, and I saw it at the expo as well. They have a team manager. Is that something you had when you were taking part, or is that again been a bit of a switch up?
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, the expo's a great shout because they had that whole area for the teams and their engineers and drivers and stuff at the back of the stage. And Yeah, I'm sure you guys probably feel the same. It was kind of like you had maybe a calculator to work out your fuel. You had some basic data from the game about what your setup was doing, but a lot of it was just kind of driving by feeling. And I guess it is still very much like that. You know, the pros are definitely driving by those kind of feelings and giving feedback. But the amount of support that the guys now receive is massive, and it's such a good thing to see for sim racing. Is it, you know, adds that professional element, but also kind of spans out the career path for a lot of people as well.
Yeah, I think it was kind of eye-opening for me, being at this Sim Expo and seeing all the rigs set up, and just seeing how some teams were basic. They just had the one rig, and others, some of them even bought three, but that's because they were doing different competitions over the weekend as well. And seeing the technical hitches that they were having, like equipment was turning up and it wasn't working, and things like that. Have you had is there a memory that sticks in your head when you were taking part around, like a panic or something not quite going your way?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will probably be able to resonate with this, but fuel has always been my kind of Achilles heel. I remember the amount of league races, I'm sure we've all been there, where you're like, I'll just underfuel slightly, just maybe by like half a liter or whatever, and then you get towards the end of the race and suddenly it's like, yeah, you're not going to make it to the end. So in terms of a specific occasion, there isn't one because there's been so many, to be honest. But yeah, fuel, just the burden of every sim racer, right?
Yeah,
I've been there.
yeah. I tend to be. I'm the cautious type, so I tend to overfuel.
Okay.
But then I'm not doing the pace of these esports guys. I think I've even raced against you at one point, Josh, and you left me behind. So yeah, it's not really. I'm just there just to kind of, if I can get into the top 20, I'm happy, and that's the and finishing the race is important as well, even if it goes badly. I had a question for you, but it's just left my head. But I saw you at the expo, and I didn't really know. I hadn't really understood that you had transitioned away from sort of taking part in racing events, and now, from what I understand with Simstaff, which is your business, that from the other side of it, while you were doing esports, you were working at other companies and sort of helping at events. So how did you get into that?
Yeah, so when I left university, I graduated with a degree in psychology and very quickly realized I didn't want to do anything with that. So I was kind of looking towards the event industry generally around motorsport, not so much like engineering and that kind of stuff, but more like the fan engagement and activation, because I kind of really enjoy that stuff. And then I realized that there's some companies out there who run simulators at events, and so then it was kind of like the perfect blend of kind of coming with those. So spent about a year with a couple of different companies, running everything from Formula E through to F1 through to stuff at F1 factories and everywhere in between. And the reason that Simstaff really took off is that, and I'm sure again you guys have probably experienced this, is if you go to an event, whether it's a trade show, a private event, whatever, and there's a simulator there, you can very quickly tell if the person who's running the simulator is a sim racer. Whether that's the amount of uptime, whether if there is a technical issue, how they're solving it, or even just the conversation that you're kind of having with the person on the stand. And I realized that actually there's not a lot of people who are sim racers who are doing this. And so, yeah, the whole kind of premise of Simstaff is that, sim racers can run sim events better than events companies can run sim racing events. So that's kind of where Simstaff came from. We're now, growing quite massively. I'll kind of avoid the marketing spiel as such, but that's kind of took up a lot of my full focus, and we work with a wide range of teams and brands now.
Yeah, it's funny you should point that out, because I was at a gaming festival where I live locally yesterday, and there was there's another brand of company that I'm not going to mention that do make their own rigs and things close to me, and they had a stand there yesterday, and I got talking to the guy who was kind of helping, and he admitted he's not a sim racer. He studied design and mechanical, and that's how he's ended up in the industry. Building these things, building the actuators. In making the rig move left and right and so forth, but you are right. You can tell immediately when you have a conversation with someone whether they're into the hobby or not. So you found kind of the hole in the market then, is that what you're saying, and you wanted to find the niche to what you're doing?
Yeah, exactly. I think, the Sim Expo is a great example. Imagine, you went to the Sim Expo and on all the stands, nobody was a sim racer. It was just, generic events companies running them. The whole feeling of the show would be completely different and it would be just really quite weird. So, yeah, what we realized is that if you take sim racers and kind of give them a bit of event training, they can perform even better than an events company doing sim racing. So we work with, everyone from football clubs to F1 teams to, marketing companies and everyone in between. And ultimately it kind of comes back to that core principle of, the sims are running for longer, there's less technical issues, there's, increased sales opportunities for the companies involved. And yeah, it's a bit of a hole in the market that we've capitalized on. I think we've got just over 85 staff now across the UK, Europe, North America, and obviously continuing to grow. So it's great for me because obviously having come from the sim racing background, there's now an opportunity for more sim racers to kind of get involved in full-time careers. And, I'd be curious to hear what you guys think, but, you go back even 2 or 3 years, sim racing as a career, unless you were a driver, was non-existent, right? It's amazing how it's changed.
Massively. It's not even just, as you said, like drivers were there, but even in that capacity, they weren't as well known and as big, and there wasn't an opportunity for them to say progress. But from like just what we do here or what you guys do, there are so many different career opportunities now in sim racing that it feels like it's almost. I've come from a real motorsport background. It's almost like it's now starting to catch up with real motorsport, and there's the same sort of career opportunities. Not as many as such, but it's getting there with that, and it's the same sort of crossover now. You can see more people crossing over into real world motorsport as well from it. So it's great to see.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're spot on there. And, the amount of people who are building their own rigs at home, like the sim racing drifting community is something I've recently discovered. And it blows my mind the level of detail that some of the people in there go with kind of customizing their rigs, building their own rigs, making adjustments. And those are all the kind of people who, A, would probably, quite like to have a career in sim racing, but B, are the perfect person to be on a stand. Because, if a random person walks up and goes, oh, I want to get involved in sim racing, they can talk to them either at a really technical level or a really simplistic level. And obviously you guys do a great job with building the sim racing communities and the online kind of element, and I think that's where we kind of plug in on the live event stuff, is that we help people transition into sim racing. They can find communities, hubs like yours I should say, and it kind of that full cycle starts to spin, if that makes sense.
Go on, John, sorry.
I was just saying, like, as you mentioned before, people who aren't into sim racing trying to run rigs at events or things like that, as you said, really notice difference. Like, we were at Autosport show this year, and there was quite a few rigs there that the people who were running it just had no idea. They just put them on the stand because they were told it would be good for them, and you're talking to them and they're just like, yeah, I don't know what like you guys are on about, and you're like, right, okay, brilliant. So it definitely, like, having people there who are knowledgeable and passionate really does help. Like we saw at Expo, there's so many people passionate about it. It just felt like everyone was there because they really wanted to be there, and it was like you could speak to someone in depth about brake pressures or like the pedal pressure, and or you could just go and be simple as you like, and there was always something to talk about. So that what you guys are doing there really does make a difference, I'm sure, with these companies at events.
I don't think people realise how much effort goes into running those events either, do they? People are on their feet all day. They're as John and I found out at the Expo. I mean, I'll be honest, I didn't stop moaning after the first day and my feet were killing me, but at the same time, I absolutely loved it, and you've turned that into a business, and you must be really incredibly proud of that.
Yeah, definitely. I think, talking to you guys, obviously you're both very personable and very approachable. So at the Sim Expo, if someone was already involved in sim racing and trying to find somewhere to go racing, it's very easy for them to be, like, I guess, trusting, of where to go, because I've spoken to you guys and these people know what they're talking about. Equally, we're kind of, I guess, the step before, which is if someone's wanting to get into sim racing first, how do they do it? And also for the brands, we work with everyone from Digital Motorsport, Race Anywhere, a whole variety. For them, it gives them kind of, again, that trust and confidence, because people are coming up to the rigs, like you were saying, John, they're saying, oh, what about these pedals, what about this wheel, and we're helping them to make an informed buying decision. So it benefits everybody, and it's just a good thing that, obviously after the pandemic, that the event industry is starting to pick back up, and the Sim Expo is a great example of that.
And you said you go to like real world motorsport events, so like how are, like, I know you're sort of like, I think you said Formula One events and things like that. You get a lot of the old school generation, as want of a better term, that don't quite understand sim racing but love their actual racing. have you found that helps brands sort of negate that and say, look, have a go at sim racing, or this is our esports team, maybe just checking them out and seeing what they're about and seeing the skills on the sims are actual real skills, and they sort of maybe respect it a bit more. I've had that before where I say to people, oh, I sim race, and they're like, oh, it's not real. It's not like real racing. So if that's, you've noticed that in real life.
Yeah, for sure. I think respect is probably the right word for that. We work with a couple of the F1 teams at their various activations rather than F1 in the kind of fan zone. And there you're getting, fathers coming with sons, mothers with daughters, families, whatever the case may be. And it just helps kind of bridge that generational gap, that technological gap, and really gives people, like you say, a newfound appreciation for what's going on. And it's quite often that then someone will come away from an event like this, purchase their own simulator, and they'll go racing. We do a lot of private installations as well, kind of supporting some of those companies I was talking about earlier. And there it's a wide range of individuals, everyone from celebrities right through to kind of just people who have, the money to spend and buy a new rig. And yeah, it's amazing how once people understand what the value is in it, and once they find somewhere to go racing and race together, that community aspect just changes their whole perspective, right? I'm sure, you guys have seen the same when you're talking to people who are maybe new to simracing.gp.
Massively, like you see people coming in and they're like, oh, it's just sim racing, I do it for a bit of a laugh, and then they discover a community where there's a lot of leagues going on, and then they go, actually this is very competitive, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's a great community to be part of. So like the SGP racing community, there's so much going on in there. They sort of maybe sign up for a bit of fun and then realize, oh, actually I can do this more seriously and get involved in leagues and things like that. I've had that with people I know who've not really understood it. I've said, come and have a go, see what you think. And then they've gone out and bought rigs. It's they get hooked to it as much as I do. So definitely, I suppose those events do help people as well.
Yeah, I introduced a really good friend of mine to sim racing, and he's got more money than me, so he went and got a better rig and other bits and pieces. But his wife's now making him sell it all because she wants the space back. So he won't be sim racing much longer. When you say you do private jobs where you get people into sim racing, how do you do that? Do you do that from I guess budget plays a big part in that, and what kind of recommendations you can make, but do you just go, well, if they've got this amount of money to spend, we'll just give them all the best equipment, or do you ask them questions and understand what they're trying to achieve? How do you join the line and kind of decide which way to go?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I guess to kind of answer the business model for, when I was setting up Simstaff, or I guess just talking about sim racing generally, obviously there's a lot of people who are competing for various different sectors. You can probably name off the top of your head 5 or 6 places that sell sim racing equipment. There's probably 5 or 6 that, find and create leagues and host communities for sim racing. So with Simstaff, really what I wanted to do is trying to avoid that conflict. So what will happen is if you go to most of the major kind of sim racing stores, I guess for lack of a better term, when you purchase a turnkey build from them, we will then be the people that do the install, because that's where our technical knowledge comes in.
Right.
Obviously, we can advise and provide guidance to the customer once it's on site, but generally speaking, we kind of let the shops do that part. But
right.
In terms of, I guess, just on that tangent of helping people kind of, when we've built those rigs as well, it's just kind of pointing them towards where to go racing. And this is why people who have that technical knowledge already, people who have already built their rigs, it's not just, here's your cockpit built. It's like, okay, let's tweak the force feedback, let's adjust the brake bias, and it just kind of brings the whole package together.
So you're not just saying, here's a rig, go drive it. You're sort of getting them in, saying, sort of sitting them in, getting them set up in the right position, and then getting it all sort of fine tweaked to how they like to feel and what their sort of preferences are as such. Because that's one of the biggest things I found when I first got my rig and things like that. I started off on a very basic thing where there's no adjustment, and I've worked my way up. When I first got my new setup as I've got now, I didn't have a clue where to start and turn to. I was just like, slap it in and sort of tinker with things and go, feels a little bit better, but no. So like having that support, I imagine for a lot of people is massive as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I'll use Moses as the example because obviously they're involved with this podcast, but you can imagine if, someone's buying some new hardware from Moza and someone turns up to install it in this person's house for them. It's like that extension of the brand, and on a technical level just kind of adds to the overall experience. Now, we don't work with Moza, hopefully we will at some point, but conceptually it's that kind of white glove experience for people who have the budget or have the desire to really make sure they're getting that experience right from the outset, and it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, I mean, go on. Oh, sorry.
It really does, because I was saying to someone the other day that I just want plug and play a lot of the time, and that's, you know, and I think that's really important. And if you can, because sometimes I think from manufacturers the hardware could be really great, but the software element not so much. I think it's fair to say. So I think getting both right is fundamentally really important for the user experience, and I think that's where consoles win over, I think, in some aspects, you know. And it's great that Assetto Corsa Competizione is available on the PlayStation and the Xbox, because it opens them up to a new market, because it just works. But sometimes you turn on a PC and something doesn't quite, you know, well, it was working yesterday, but it's not quite working today, and that could be due to a driver update or maybe a slightly loose cable inside your case. So I think the white glove element you just mentioned, I think, is really important. Be able to get. And then, do you take someone? Because it reminded me yesterday when I tried the setup yesterday, the gaming festival. It was Assetto Corsa, and it was VR. And I used to race in VR in a circle, and I just forgot, like, to get to the start button, you had to look up to the left. You know, the little nuances that people don't think about, because it wasn't designed originally to work with in VR. So the menu system isn't quite right and things like that. So do you take them through the sims that they've purchased? I mean, how does it work from like a software point of view as well?
Yeah, you've hit on something really quite important there, which is, you know, with the recruitment process for us, it's not just anyone who has a sim rig can come and join Simstaff. You know, we try to kind of be very selective with our recruitment, and these are all people who work for us who have had, you know, at some point some kind of bugbear, whether that's software or hardware, because, you know, like you say, that's then where, when you're with a customer, you can kind of give them those pointers along the way, so that they're not even having to pick up the phone in a week, 2 weeks time saying, oh, it's not working. You know, it's like, these are people who have experienced the frustrations and now know the equipment. So yeah, on the software front, you know, we've got a great example. We installed a simulator for someone a couple of weeks ago, and there it was not only setting up iRacing, Assetto Corsa, etc. It was like, let's install custom shaders patch. Let's show you how to kind of do some post-processing filters. You know, if they did want to tweak setups and that kind of stuff, we showed them just how to do it fundamentally. And obviously they'll explore it in their own time. But it's, again, just that, I guess one of the big things we stop happening is returns to these kind of brands, whether it's, you know, Fanatec, Playseed, etc., whatever, is that it's not a customer getting frustrated saying this isn't working, I'm returning it. It's, oh, actually, I do know how this works, and I know these nuances, like you kind of alluded to.
It's just like I've experienced it myself. We, in the real world stuff, we used to put our gentleman drivers and say, get a sim, you can really try it, and then they'd pick up and go, I have no idea what I'm doing. So like something like that would be like what you guys do, getting them in, set up, software's explained, the actual process of it all explained is that would put a lot of people off sim racing. So what that is doing is getting them in and going, because when I first started, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with setups, I don't know what I'm doing with setting up the wheel. I lost all faith in it until I found someone who would actually sit down and help me through it. So that's a massive thing as well.
Are you any good with setups now, John?
No, still useless.
What about you? What about you, Josh? With like just car setups, and it's, you know, is that something you understand? Do you take your customers through that, or do you let them fend for themselves?
Yeah, it depends really. On Assetto Corsa, for example, depending on the car, I can usually dial stuff in, but I'm sure you guys probably experience this, and you know, John, I'd be curious to get your feedback, is what you learn in real life doesn't necessarily correlate to, you know, the sim when it comes to a car setup. There can be like some fundamentally broken car setups that are quick.
100%.
Right? And
yeah, I mean, ACC's the prime example of that. We put a lot of our drivers at first into that because we were racing SRO championships, and now cars and tracks are all in there. So we're like, go there. And then realizing there's all these metas and things like that to make the cars actually feel good. We were trying to like put our real life setups on the cars in the game. So we drove a McLaren GT4, tried to put that on the car, didn't work. And the driver's like, what is going on? We're like, we don't know. So stuff like that doesn't, like, having knowledge from the industry does help as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, we're not aiming, our service isn't really aimed at the person who is sim racing 8 hours a day building their own sim, because these are the people who are, you know, they're the people that we're wanting to recruit. You know, they're the people that are really passionate about what's going on. It is very much geared towards that kind of more entry-level market, people who are new to sim racing generally, going to events, you know, to get them in the door, get them through the kind of door frame, and then they can find resources for various elements, they can find places to go racing, but it's just that hand-holding at the start where it's so important.
I mean, what events have you, like, done like, do you do like larger scale things? Obviously you spoke about like the home installs and the small installs. Do you do like a mass event with like, say, tons of rigs, and you go set them all up and they're there for, say, like the weekend, and you supply the staff for that? And then is that something else you do as well?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of them are obviously white labeled, but I can probably allude generally to what they are. So there is like a high profile, maybe a racing series that has a $750,000 prize pool that we've been involved with. With Gfinity, we've done some stuff for their V10R League, for example. And then like pop-up shops and more Formula One focused activations as well. And obviously there it's a completely different scale. You're talking thousands of people potentially per day compared to kind of the private customer install. But fundamentally the experience is still the same. If you turn up to use a sim rig for the first time at a store, you want to just jump in and be able to go racing, and if something goes wrong, you want someone right there to fix it straight away. It's amazing how, if you don't have that, how bad an experience it can leave for someone, and they'll just be turned off from the hobby altogether. And kind of like you said, John, they won't respect it, which is such an important aspect.
And I think, sorry, go on, Paul.
No, go carry on.
I was just going to say, like, I feel like the transition now is so massive that it is getting more respected as well, because there's people so passionate about this industry and so passionate about pushing it out there and getting it into the real world motorsport fans, that it is getting more respected. And you see, and I think F1 drivers, say like the big profile like Max, Lando, them showing their sim racing side as well really does help the community. I don't know if you've seen an increase in, say, since that all started happening in lockdown as well, that you've seen an increase in sort of orders and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll throw to Paul in a second, because I'm sure you guys have got great data on your side. But so Simstaff turned 2 years old literally like a week and a half ago. So we literally just missed kind of the start of the pandemic, which obviously when all the rig sales were through the roof. But from the event front, we've seen a huge demand, and a lot of people will say, "Oh, I know Max does this," or "I know George does this," or "Is this really how Lando sits in a sim?" And yeah, it just helps bridge that gap massively for anyone who watches F1 or any form of motorsport and then sees a sim rig. And obviously that they're not going to be at the same level, but it does help them kind of frame just how difficult it is to drive a car. So
John was asking you about events that you help out with. I was looking at your website earlier on, and I can see that one of the services you offer is simulator rental and purchase. So do you have a number of simulators ready to go for these events, and then you ship them around globally? But I also saw that you've broken out into the US as well. So do you have equipment, in different parts of the world, or do you go and rent them yourself and bring them into the place and set them all out? How does that model kind of work?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to give a shameless plug here to the guys at Playseat, because they've helped us out massively. We literally spent this past weekend building a whole bunch of simulators, and just before we jumped on the podcast, I was talking about moving boxes, because I've got a whole bunch of monitors over there as well. So we got 7 sim rigs in the UK, access up to 40 if we need them, and then we've got 5 at the moment in Canada, planning to scale that up obviously as well. So it was an interesting one, and again, I'd be curious to hear if you guys had a similar experience. But people were coming to us originally for the staff, saying, I've got a sim rig, can you provide the staff to run it? But it's very quickly becoming, oh, as well as the staff, do you have a spare sim rig? Or one of our partners has got an event, can you send a sim rig here? So it's not out and out kind of event deployment and rental to just anybody, but more that kind of our client base that we're already serving. And I'm sure, I guess it was the same with you guys, when you launched the kind of community functionality, is there was more and more requests as it builds over time and as the landscape develops, right?
Yeah, like as you say, the more it grows and the more the industry grows, the more requests and more sort of, you keep that base client base, but they want more from it, or they want more built upon. Like as you said, you originally were just providing staff, and now it's rigs and things like that. Yeah, the industry is growing so quickly that sometimes it's hard to keep up with it all, and I think some of the hardware suppliers are struggling to keep up. So if those companies say wanted to buy a rig and they couldn't, at least then you've got that opportunity to provide them with one to use in that meantime as such as well, because I've seen so many shortages.
No, definitely. I think the big thing there as well is if you look at a lot of the sim racing hardware companies, they're quite small kind of teams. Okay, they've got their manufacturing processes, but the actual core team are quite small. So if they want to go to Sim Expo, you're potentially losing anywhere from 10 to 30% of your office, and it's like, well, do they really need to be there for the full weekend? Could they be there for only 1 or 2 days, but they still need the rigs? So we can come in and fill the gap, act as if we're kind of I guess white labeled as a conduit on their behalf, and then they can focus on what they do best, we can do what we do best, and it pairs together.
Exactly, because those people from the office might not be positioned to go, and run a sim rig or speak to people
right.
on the daily, whereas you guys handpick your staff to say these are the guys that are passionate and who know what they're talking about. Put them out there and let them talk to them. It's massive.
I guess that's kind of similar to what you and I did at the expo, isn't it? On our stand last year, you know, like getting, because I think, Josh, when did you first attend the Sim Racing Expo?
The first year it was at the Nürburgring, so was that 2018, 2019?
So I was there in 2019 when it was at the Nürburgring.
Yeah.
And then went last year, which is when I met yourself, and it's just changed so much in that short amount of time. And you know, moving location was quite a risk for them, but I think it paid off. You know, I think there was definitely more footfall, and more people who were new to, like, we got asked questions, and people, and just kind of getting people in the rig, getting them up and running, showing them how to do, because a lot of them would get in the rig and then try and use the clutch as the brake, because that's what they would use in the car and things like that, like not quite all things. So it's just kind of like, no, this is, and sometimes somebody didn't speak English, so so it's kind of like, needed just kind of using, go brake, accelerator, brake, like using hand signals to try and get things communicated. But I think the expo and other things, like yesterday when I was at a gaming festival, they had some rigs with the F1 game on, and they just had some basic pedals and blah, blah, blah. But sometimes that's all you need. It's kind of like, I think the expo has got to do that a little bit more, in the sense, like, because it's the gateway drug. Not everybody has thousands and thousands of pounds to spend on expensive equipment, and I started out with a cheap rig, as like John did, and a cheap wheel and pedals, and have upgraded over the years.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really quite crucial there, which is that local culture, I guess, for lack of a better term, is really quite important. So part of our extended network is, the long-term goal is to have someone in every city to kind of respond to events. So we had people at the CSGO major in Paris, for example, French speaking. So that way, when someone was getting into the rig, we were able to bridge that language barrier. And again, for the brands involved, it gives them, an extended sales pipeline. I think in terms of the expo, my opinion is a little bit out there, I guess, a little bit different, which is, if I was a sim racing company, I'd go to the Sim Expo out of necessity, but I'd be looking at every other event that isn't the Sim Expo to actually kind of proactively, approach, because I think that's where you get the new audiences.
Yes.
And, I know Autosport was maybe, it's an okay example. We'll use that as an example. Like, the amount of new users you could get for, Sim Racing GP, or new, purchases of Moza hardware at a show like that is tenfold what you get at the Sim Expo, where people are already coming, they already know what they need. And it's like, I just think it's two different markets, really.
Yeah. Massively. Like, I saw at Expo, a lot of the people we were seeing getting into rigs are people who've already raced. They love their sim racing. They're ready to go. They just want to try the equipment out and see how they get on. Whereas other shows, you're gonna see people who are new to it and who want to jump in. Like, there's a few at Expo where it's like a parent jumping into the rig or something like that. But other big events, like, I've seen it before, in, like, from a real world side of things, we've taken a car to a real event and no one really quite knows. We've got so many more different, engagement out of it, so much more engagement out of it, because they're completely new to it. It's a new thing, and I guess that's where brands really see a value from it, is different events where they can get new audiences in, buy this sim or whatever, like, or the hardware.
Definitely.
Yeah. Do you help companies drive their strategy for events like that? So, they might have a target to engage, and then you might go, well, you might think that the expo might be the best choice for you, but actually, if you want to get new customers and new people into the hobby, if we want to call it that, you actually might want to take a slightly different approach.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, and there's a couple of clients that we do work with that are kind of now seeing that, and they're tapping into that market, and their growth is really amazing. I mean, brand strategy is not something that's one of our core focuses, but it is something that we do obviously get approached on, because we've got quite a bit of data from various events throughout the year. And yeah, it's so interesting to see. I think that's like the next major land grab. I mean, everyone talks about North America, and I think that's the perfect example. Is you've got like 3 Formula 1 races there, the rest there is not. So if you want to engage with the sim racing audience in North America, outside of NASCAR and IndyCar, you need to be going to non-motorsport events, and that'll be where it's really, really interesting to see. You know, you look at Rennsport and other titles; they're trying to be a bit more of a esports title than a motorsport title or sim racing title. So I don't know if you guys are seeing that kind of shift as well in terms of how the communities are maybe, you know, engaging and activating. But it definitely feels like people are trying to create more of a show now and not just here's a league race on a Sunday night.
100%. Like there's definitely more focus on the broadcast element, the making that, as you said, like a production out of it, especially now with Rennsport as it has been with the whole ESL thing. They make such a big show out of it, making it a real life LAN event. It's and even the SRO LAN events now, they're really trying to engage it and get an audience there and really start to bring a show out of it rather than just saying this is our league race on a Sunday night as such. And it's great to see that it's trying to push that mainstream as well. It's really good.
I think what you've got to remember though, a lot of the people running these events are the people that started out doing stuff for communities.
Very true.
You know, I think and like you look at someone like Paul Jeffrey who's doing the SRO stuff at the moment, and you know I'm lucky to call the lanky man a friend of mine because he's like 6'7". It's ridiculous. I called him the other day the Peter Crouch of sim racing. But yeah, like he's still doing the esports SRO stuff, but he's also taken to the real world and now commentating on TCR, and it's genuinely great to see, because it's not just, I think people sometimes forget, it's not just the drivers that can sometimes do the crossover, and some drivers who do crossover, if you look into their past, they do have real life racing experience. It's just that money might have stopped them progressing when they got to a certain point, and you see that, I think, a little bit out there, but also there are the people that are in the sort of racing communities that we see online that also, especially in the commentator arena, who get to make that jump across into real life as well. So it opens other doors. But what people don't see is the hard work that that people put in behind the scenes. I mean, when you do a broadcast, even if it is just a little league with 5 views or whatever, they've still got to spend the time in prepping OBS and everything else and making sure everything works. And that's a skill in itself, and I think the community has some really talented people, and I'm sure that's what you're finding when it comes to hiring people for your organisation.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. I mean, we as Simstaff are already kind of, we're speaking to yourselves and some other brands in the space about how can we really tap into this and work with the communities to provide, obviously in the first instance, freelance opportunities, but potentially stuff that scales to part-time and full-time. And, if we use broadcasting as an example, the amount of brands that go, okay, I'd love some sim rigs. Oh, but you can do some vision mixing. You can have it on a screen at a stand. It just elevates the whole process for them. And again, using someone like Paul or, Dan from your guys' sides, these are great personalities, and if you think about how that relationship's been formed, it's within sim racing. And if someone's first experience is kind of meeting someone like Paul or like Dan, it elevates it so much more. And that for us is kind of the big thing, is if we can capitalize on that talent and recruit it and bring it on board, it just makes such a world of difference.
Yeah, it does, and you see some of the level of the broadcast you get amongst communities, and I think what happened is that during COVID, a lot of places turned to those communities because they didn't have the necessary experiences, and doors and avenues started to open for others in the industry. Like for me, myself, I'm fully employed elsewhere. I do this because I love doing it, right? And it's a hobby for me at the end of the day. But everyone's so passionate. I've met some great people, and that's one of the things that I loved about being in the expo, was I was able to actually physically touch people and have lunch with them and dinner with them, and not touch them in a weird way, I just want to say, but you know what I mean, like shake their hands, high five, whatever that looks like. I mean, I'll take a man hug off anybody any time of the day, but do you know what I mean? And I think that you kind of just saw everybody coming together for the thing that they love to do, and the amount of passion coming through as well, and like you say, brands suddenly can kind of be elevated because they kind of like, their eyes are suddenly open, like this is amazing, and this is all from some computer sitting on a desk somewhere.
No, exactly. So if you go to Manchester City's YouTube channel, for example, they did some content for Next Entire, one of their sponsors, which we provided that activation to them. And initially it started off, they said, yeah, we wanted, you know, the players to race against a racing driver and we'll kind of see what happens. Within a matter of, you know, a couple of calls, it accelerated to, okay, so we want head-to-head races, we want, you know, some vision mixing, we want some replay clips, we want all this kind of stuff. And then it goes from just like dropping off some hardware to, you know, people engaging with football players, you know, people broadcasting it, streaming it, editing it. And it's like, you know, at least for myself, you know, I never in a million years would have thought I'd be engaging with Manchester City, let alone through sim racing. So it's amazing how the brands can tap into it. And that's why for us, like, the more we can build up that talent pool, serve literally the rest of the globe, it's there's so many opportunities for people, and I can't wait to see where it goes.
So, yeah, can't wait to see where it goes. Where do you think it is going to go? Because I'll be honest, I kind of expected things to slow down once the pandemic sort of became a thing in history, and we're now 3 years beyond that now, and things don't appear to be slowing down. Was I wrong to think that, or how? I mean, obviously you started a business up in 2021, so you must have seen something that I didn't see.
I don't know if it was that or if it was a little bit of luck, but
right.
I think we were ahead of the curve slightly. You know, obviously, and I'm by no means a financial expert. I think, you know, everyone's obviously talking about, you know, the cost of living, and marketing budgets are typically one of the first things to get cut. But the important thing to remember with sim racing is that it's not just a marketing activation. You know, we have companies who are using it for team building. We have companies who are using it for research. And so when you look at it like that, you go, okay, so actually there is a lot of demand still for this service. Obviously SRO, you see what Alessio and the guys at AK are doing. And I think it's going to continue to grow. And I think, you know, people's trust in public events is growing up massively again. And based on the data we're seeing, you know, I was saying to the guys last quarter, we were up 186% over this time last year. So, you know, obviously part of that is because we're scaling as a small business, but still the demand is very much there. And like I say, you know, the goal is still to have someone in every city in the world. And if we can achieve that, then maybe at that point we'll consider that we kind of tapped out the market. But until then, I think there's so much potential for everybody.
So what kind of CEO are you? Because and do you think of yourself as a CEO? Because you're still relatively young, aren't you, Josh?
I mean, I'm 26 going on 27, so...
Yeah, so you got a few years on me, yeah. But are you still mucking in, getting involved, or are you now sitting back, crossing your arms, going, no, I'm the CEO, I don't do that anymore?
No, to be fair, I think, you know, given that I started in sim racing as a sim racer, you know, I still have a huge passion for events and getting involved. So over the weekend, you know, I was helping the guys with building the rigs for what's coming up. I'll be at Silverstone and then Goodwood running sims for us. And obviously within that, there's still, you know, the admin and back end stuff that needs to go. But David Earle is someone who, you know, I've had the fortune of working with quite closely over the past few years and learn a lot from him. So, you know, I guess in a nutshell, I don't really consider myself a CEO as such, but definitely kind of a representative of the brand and someone who's trying to promote careers in sim racing. And hopefully just the message gets across to people that, you know, there are opportunities out there, whether it's something you want to do full time, whether you fit it around another job like, you know, you guys are. But the scope for sim racing is bigger than ever.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about what the future holds, not just generally in the scope of sim racing, but the hardware, software, anything else, community-wise. And I think that's another thing, is the likes of Discord have had a big part to play in not just sim racing communities, but other communities. And then you find out that WEC use it for their stewarding and things like that. So it plays a part in real life motorsport as much as it does and that might have been something they'd learned from the virtual Le Mans 24, right? It was like, what is this Discord thing that you guys keep talking about? And now they're using it in the real life one. And I think that was a big thing for me, was the Le Mans 24, the virtual, right? I didn't think we'd ever see that like a great event like that, because it replicated the real life in such a glorious way, I thought.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess, John, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, because you've probably got the best position from all of us on this. But I mean, it certainly seemed to me like it was, despite all the software issues, which in reality most games have, you know, no game's perfect. Yeah. I think conceptually, you know, it was a great way to bring the two worlds together.
Oh, massively, and you can see that from, say, like Jimmy, like look at Jimmy Broadbent, like he's gone and jumped in a real car and he won a championship last season. The crossover is definitely happening more and more, and a lot of real world teams and drivers I speak to now, who I'm still friends with from when I work, are taking it a lot more seriously. I mean, look at SRO now as well. Their real life championship, they have their real world pro drivers go and sit in a rig at an event, run an event, and that race would give them real championship points. Say 3-4 years ago, I would never have dreamed of that happening. You wouldn't expect anyone to go, I've got a good idea, let's put all these pro drivers in a sim rig and that can affect the real championship. But it shows that the shift is happening in the sim world and the respect is getting there. And that I think that's a massive pack from real world events, the drivers, the big name drivers getting involved and things like that. I think that's really helping the community and showing us in a good light as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think the last thing I'd kind of say on that is, if you look at the winter break or even the summer break, I suppose, like if you're a real life racing driver, what do you do now? You've probably got a sim rig sat in the corner that's either gathering dust or you're using it, hopefully. So it makes sense that you jump on, that you're finding leagues to race in, that you're, maybe still recommending to some of the newer drivers on the grid to get a sim. So I think sim racing has proven that it's a valid tool, and that's one of the biggest steps. Obviously, people like Moses coming into the space, dropping the price of what it takes to get decent equipment, also has a huge impact because it just opens up the door to so many people. So yeah, it's going to be really curious to see how it grows over the next 5 years. I think the hard part's been done, and it's now just kind of maintaining that growth.
Definitely. And as you mentioned, Moser coming in and dropping that entry level but good equipment price is only going to be a good thing for other brands who then go, well, now we've got a rival at. And it's going to be it's a really interesting space to see where hardware brands will go in the next 3 or 4 years, because everyone's bringing out new products all the time, and some of the innovation in it is just ridiculously good for the prices that they've now got to put them up for. So it's really going to be interesting to see.
Competition is good for the consumer, isn't it?
Exactly.
And I think the more that we see, the better will choice. I mean, that's the only thing, is the more choice, the harder it gets to choose what you go for, I think. But Josh, we talked a lot about your business, and you said that it is a hobby of yours. How much sim racing are you getting up to these days?
Yeah, that's a great question. To be honest, not as much as I want to. I did the Team 87, was it the Team 87 series? It was obviously hosted by yourselves, with Jimmy, which was awesome. I occasionally try and dip into the Fire Esports series when I can get involved in that. I just love picking up and playing Assetto Corsa, with the amount of content that's available. You can just pick it up, you can race the Nordschleife, you can go down LA Canyons, whatever the case is. So it's probably more casual now, but it's still like a really important part of work, as bad as it sounds, because ultimately when those new titles come out, I picked up Round Sport over the weekend, that's all the content that's going to be informing the manufacturers and the distributors, and then in turn us. So it's a pretty good excuse to continue sim racing. But I'm sure you guys are the same. The more time you spend in the space, the less time actually in the seat, right?
100%. Yeah, I've noticed that. But when you do want to get in, you want to jump in and have a bit of a laugh and enjoy.
Yeah, but John's faster than me though. I need to get some tips. But
yeah, but I'm not quite Josh's level yet though. So
yeah, I once did because I live quite close to Buckmore Park, and I did my first ever endurance race a few years ago, and I thought I was half decent, but then you get teams turning up with all the gear, like radios, everything, like pit boards, and I'm like, wow, this is next level, isn't it? And I think I was one of the slowest drivers, and I was like a little bit disheartened, but yeah, I should race more than I do, but I work full time, and sometimes turning on the rig at the end of the day, like all I want to do is go to bed, if I'm being totally honest with you. I'm such an old man sometimes. But I also, when it's a bit warmer like it is now, it's getting that motivation, and that's why I think it's quite tremendous that we've got so many drivers in today taking part in the Motor Endurance Championship, because some of them will be sweating depending where they live, right? And I did my last race a couple of weeks ago. Wasn't a very good race, but I got out of the seat and my back was all just wet. So even though I had a fan on me, but when you do, if you pick it up or you've got a few minutes to yourself, what's your go-to sim? What do you fire up? Where do you head?
Yeah, it's kind of two directions. So Assetto Corsa is always a good one. The guys at Kunos have been great to me over the years. So I always like picking up AC1 and kind of jumping on a public server. The other one's Dirt Rally. I do enjoy a bit of rally racing as well. And it's just because it's kind of pick up and play. I think, I did a piece with the Gadget Show, and it was kind of about how entry level or how affordable sim racing can be. And we had, it was very basic, like wheel stand, not a cockpit, a wheel stand, plus a laptop, plus I think it was a Thrustmaster wheel at the time. And the whole package was like, I don't know, £1,200, £1,300, but it just showed how accessible it can be, and you can literally then fold it up and put it away. So I think my one big, hope for the sim racing space is that we continue to have that kind of pick up and playability.
Definitely.
Because it's just so important for the communities, for the pros, for people who just want to have a good time, right?
I mean, that's how I started. I started with a wheel bolted to my desk on Project Cars 2, and I got into, then played it for fun, got into league racing, and then I was like, I didn't realise what community was there, and that's when I started picking up more equipment and things like that. So as you said, hopefully the manufacturers, yes, they're still trying to push this high-end stuff for lower budget, still keep making that entry-level stuff so we can see more and more people coming in, because as Paul said, and we've got friends started to come into it. You see big YouTubers now starting to get into it. You've got Shroud doing it earlier this year, and someone like some of the British guys at the top, like I think the Sidemen guys, they're now picking up sim racing and doing content on it. So it's only going to be good for these brands are still doing the entry level equipment for sure, so people can start to pick it up and get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Hamlin, we've been watching today in the Mercedes, as races with a base attached to a desk. Like not everybody has the budget to, as we see on screen. We still got the race going around at 71 spins, but yeah, I think sometimes you kind of like you're racing against someone and you find out they're 2 seconds like faster than you, and they're using the most basic of equipment. And it just because sometimes people correlate equipment with pace and talent, but it isn't. It's unfortunately it's the human that is where it all falls down, and generally that is me. But that's not to say when I made the jump to better pedals, it definitely made me more consistent, more consistently slow, but still consistent, right? Less spin. So it does play a part, but it isn't the be and end all. And I think that's sometimes. I use it as the gateway drug. I think is a term I like to use, because I think you can get hooked to it. And I've got nephews and nieces, and I want to get and I try and get people hooked into it as much as possible, because I think it's a not only is it a great hobby, but there's great communities out there, and a lot of those reside on Sim Racing GP, and people that are willing just to help you and share their knowledge and get you up to speed, and like how you do a team swap and driver swap and things like that. These little nuances, each game's slightly different, right? So that's the thing as well. One game does it one way, another game does it a completely different way, and that's where you and your company come in, Josh, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. It's like just holding someone's hand, because I was thinking about this the other day. Besides like a house and a car and maybe like an engagement ring or something, a sim rig for a lot of people is probably one of the biggest expenses they're going to make. And yet, when you order a fridge or you order an oven or any kind of utensil, there is always some form of kind of onboarding and training, whether that's manuals and documentation, whether that's someone coming to install it and show you. And okay, it's not as simplistic as an oven or a fridge, but a sim rig is, like I say, so expensive, and it's kind of like, okay, here's the manuals, put it together yourself, turn it on yourself. The software might not necessarily work with our hardware, but you have to work that out. It just doesn't create a great experience, and I think if you can bridge that gap and bring it together by someone who doesn't have a vested interest to be, selling the most wheels or selling a specific type of software, but just a group of people who have a passion for the hobby or for the space, that's where everyone can really benefit from.
And as you said, you're trying to get the community of sim racing. I find I've been in a lot of different gaming communities. I used to play competitive, Call of Duty or Counter-Strike, things like that. They're massively toxic communities. No one will help you if you have an issue. Whereas I feel like sim racing, I have an issue and I put it in a community Discord, someone's always willing to say, oh, I'll hop on and help you, or this is how you fix that, or I have a computer issue and someone will come and help me with it. And that's like those people you said you're trying to take in and give them the opportunities is so good to see, because the community as a whole, there are obviously a few bad eggs, but the sim community is brilliant as a whole at helping people out. So that's great to hear as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, right? Imagine if you're at home, you're fixing, your wheel has, software issues. So you're updating the drivers, you're taking various bits apart, or maybe you're adjusting, software. Like we have brands who are prepared to kind of pay for that service. So like if you have that much of a passion for sim racing, why not benefit from it as well? So maybe it funds the rest of your hardware that you're buying, or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think that's like my big message is just if you have that technical knowledge and passion, be sure to kind of either reach out to us or just chat to people about it, because there's so much upside to having that knowledge.
Yeah. So I'm conscious that we're coming up to 6 o'clock. So, and again, thank you for giving up your time today to talk to us. It's been absolutely fascinating. But will you be at the Sim Racing Expo this year? Will you see you there?
Yeah, I will be there. I think we can definitely catch up. And can we tell the story? We had a pizzeria. I think it was on one of the nights that we basically all took over, didn't we? If you were there, Paul.
Yeah, it was quite a walk from the expo, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, the restaurant maybe had like 20, 30 seats, and we literally probably brought 30 or 40 people. But
Yeah.
it's just that sim racing community, right? It just transcends beyond what's on the screen when you turn that PC off at the end of a race.
Yeah, that was a really great weekend. I'll always refer to it was knackering, but it was also great at the same time. I mean, I wasn't like some of the people, they would stay out all night. I was like, look, I know I've got a big day tomorrow. I'm gonna go to bed at a reasonable hour and stay off the beers. But it's just nice to see all the effort, and it was kind of like, in a way, like a celebration of all that hard work that people put in, and just putting those, kind of getting to actually have a one-to-one conversation with people that you've had text conversations with over the internet, or even just a voice chat in Discord. And I know there'll be a few more of the SGP community and other communities that I'm in Discord will be there this year, and I can't wait to meet them all. But thank you, Josh, for giving up your time today for the podcast. I'm sure we'll speak again at some point, and thank you very much for giving up your time. It was absolutely great to hear about Simstaff, and if you're interested, go and check out their website. Josh, you said you've got vacancies on the go at the moment, is that right?
We're always recruiting. So yeah, be sure to reach out.
So if you're passionate about sim racing and you want to turn it into a career, then reach out to Josh. I'm sure he wouldn't mind having a conversation with you and understanding what they've got available. But yeah, thank you very much, Josh, for joining us. John, thank you also for being here, and we'll see you next time for episode 3 of the SGP podcast, powered by Moser Racing. Right, welcome back.